Hi, and welcome to Creepy Crime Story, where the darkest truths aren't imagined. They're real. Three bodies, one rifle, and a quiet town that didn't see it coming. When Whitney Fowler dialed 911 from a farmhouse in Grafton, she wasn't asking for help. She was documenting her last minutes. What happened in that house didn't just destroy a family. It exposed a truth no one wanted to admit. The signs were always there. At exactly 6:36 p.m. on June 18, 2025, dispatchers in Rensselaer County received a 911 call that would shatter the illusion of safety in a rural New York township, long known more for maple syrup and farmers markets than murder. The caller identified herself as Whitney Fowler. The line was quiet. No screaming, no audible gunshots, no desperate pleas. Just a woman's voice saying she was scared, that her husband had the rifle again, that it wasn't the first time, and that this time, it felt different. By the time officers from New York State Police Troop G arrived at the residence on South Road in Grafton, 15 minutes had passed. The front door was unlocked. The first responding trooper noted the scent of spent gunpowder, still lingering in the air. Outside, just off the porch, lay a young woman, later confirmed to be Whitney Fowler, 27 years old. She had been shot once, center mass. No signs of a struggle, no defensive wounds. The position of her body suggested she may have been trying to leave. Inside the residence, two more victims were found. In the living room, Wilson Fowler, age 55, retired contractor, was pronounced dead from multiple gunshot wounds to the back. In a chair by the dining table sat Anita Crandall, 69, Whitney's grandmother-in-law. A tea mug still rested near her left hand. She too had been killed instantly by a single round to the chest. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken windows, nothing to suggest a home invasion or robbery gone wrong. Standing in the hallway, unarmed but visibly holding a black semi-automatic rifle moments before, was Joshua M. Fowler, Whitney's husband. At 26 years old, his only prior criminal record was a misdemeanor charge for domestic harassment, years prior. His clothes bore no blood. He said nothing as troopers handcuffed him. Investigators at the scene moved quickly to isolate the crime zone and secure potential evidence. The weapon, a .223 caliber AR-15 style rifle, was recovered near the foyer. It was legally owned and registered to Wilson Fowler, the deceased father. A forensic sweep of the premises was initiated within the hour. Gunshot residue tests were taken. The layout of the victims suggested a progression. Grandmother killed first, followed by the father, and finally Whitney, possibly outside while attempting to flee. But the sequencing wasn't immediately clear, and not everything about the scene added up. According to the preliminary scene log, no neighbors had heard gunfire, though homes were within shouting distance. Surveillance footage from a nearby utility pole camera, a rare upgrade for a town like Grafton, caught no motion or vehicles arriving or departing. Inside the home, the dining table had been set for dinner. 3 plates, uneaten food. The television was still playing a rerun of a local news broadcast. There were no signs of disarray, no overturned chairs, no signs of forced confinement, no blood trails across rooms. Each victim had died where they sat or stood. The only disruption was a wine glass shattered near the front porch. Crime scene analysts marked it for fingerprinting. When Joshua was transported to Rensselaer County Jail for holding, he remained silent. During the initial intake, officers reported that he refused to answer standard booking questions. He did not ask about his wife. He did not mention the victims. He didn't ask for a lawyer. As investigators began piecing together the immediate facts, a few things became clear. There was no break-in. The weapon belonged inside the home. The deceased were all family. And the caller had reached out for help just minutes before dying. On record, the dispatcher noted Whitney's tone as flat, deliberate, quiet. There was no panic, but her final words were transcribed clearly in the incident report. "He has the rifle, he's pacing. I need someone to come now." She hung up before further information could be extracted. Investigators began canvassing neighbors, retrieving prior incident reports, and pulling family history. Within 24 hours, a clearer picture of the Fowler household would begin to emerge. One that hinted at years of tension behind closed doors, strained dynamics, and missed opportunities for intervention. But the evidence had to speak first. And on day one, the evidence began with the rifle. When state investigators began their background checks on the Fowler residence, there was no initial outlier on paper. A single-family home on South Road, 3 adults, 1 registered weapon, no active restraining orders, no history of drug offenses, and, officially, no open investigations involving any member of the household. But paper only captures what's reported. 2 archived incident reports dated prior to 2025 quickly emerged during initial checks by Rensselaer County Sheriff's Office. The first was filed in November 2018. Officers had been dispatched to the same address following a reported domestic dispute between a father and son. Wilson Fowler, 55 at the time, alleged that his son Joshua, then 19, had shoved him into the kitchen cabinets during an argument over finances. No charges were filed. Both parties refused to press. The responding deputy logged the report as a non-criminal domestic disturbance. No weapons had been involved, but the incident remained on record. The second entry, more recent, came from October 2021. This time it was Joshua's wife, Whitney Fowler, who called authorities. According to the responding trooper's log, Whitney stated she feared escalation during an argument, but did not wish to pursue criminal charges. In the notes, subject reportedly slammed a door, yelled aggressively, no physical contact reported. Subject calmed by arrival. Victim declined further action. These 2 events, years apart, dismissed by those involved and treated as isolated, would later be reclassified as pre-incident warning signs under New York State's post-incident forensic review protocols. Digital forensics extracted from Whitney Fowler's phone during initial data capture revealed more. Investigators obtained a lawful search warrant to extract texts, call logs, and app usage from Whitney's personal device recovered near her body. The results provided timeline reconstruction for the final 72 hours preceding the triple homicide. Between June 16th and June 18th, Whitney had exchanged 14 messages with a close friend under the contact name Tessa Work. Many were deleted but recovered through metadata. The most recent, time-stamped 4:17 p.m. on June 18th, read, "He's not yelling like before. He's too calm. That's worse." At 4:42 p.m., she attempted to send another message. "If anything happens, please don't let them blame me." The message was unsent. Phone usage logs indicate Whitney had been active on the Yelp app from 5:02 to 5:09 p.m., viewing listings for nearby apartment rentals. Strong indications she may have been planning to leave. Search history on her iCloud account showed queries from June 13th, including emergency housing upstate NY women, can you break a lease if you're not safe? NY domestic shelter helpline. The question for investigators was no longer if Whitney felt threatened, but why nothing followed those signs. Parallel to this, forensic analysts reviewed Joshua Fowler's own digital footprint. While his phone remained locked behind a 6-digit PIN, still unbroken as of June 30th, a laptop in the master bedroom was accessed. Local browser cache retained recently viewed content, including threads on firearm forums referencing castle doctrine and home defense laws in New York. A 16-minute YouTube video titled, "When the System Fails, Standing Your Ground Legally." The laptop's internal clock confirmed the video was streamed at 11:21 p.m. on June 17th, less than 20 hours before the first bullet was fired. During interviews conducted with extended family, a clearer narrative began forming. Joshua had withdrawn from his previous job at an auto body shop in late 2024. Since then, he'd been living full-time at home, rarely leaving the property. Family members described his demeanor in recent months as quiet, moody, and controlling. Whitney, according to one co-worker at the regional clinic, had requested to switch shifts due to home pressure in May. She'd begun carpooling and avoided discussing her marriage openly. This behavior pattern fit what the Bureau of Criminal Investigation flagged as progressive domestic isolation, a risk factor tied to controlling behaviors that may not result in physical assault, but which heighten the risk of eventual violence. Crime scene investigators returned to the South Road property on June 20th to reprocess the master bedroom. A notebook was recovered beneath the dresser containing incomplete entries in Whitney's handwriting. One page was dated May 29th. It read, in part, "I can't stay silent much longer. He needs help but won't ask. If I stay, I might become a headline. Unfortunately, she did. From a procedural standpoint, the family dynamic offered no immediate red flags requiring state intervention under existing law. No filed orders of protection, no criminal conviction, no firearm violations. Yet the pattern, documented arguments, recorded fear, digital indications of planning to leave, painted a picture of mounting stress and unaddressed psychological volatility. A representative from the district attorney's office later stated in a press briefing, "There's no doubt Whitney tried to signal what was happening, but our system doesn't always respond to quiet warnings." The forensic priority shifted from what happened during the killings to everything that had led up to them, because that's where the pattern of pre-incident indicators had been hiding. June 19, 2025, less than 24 hours after the incident on South Road, New York State Police began processing forensic data with a shift in scope, from surface-level triage to evidence sequencing. This wasn't just a triple homicide. This was a layered event, calculated or chaotic, unclear yet in structure, but it followed a pattern, and the pattern began before the gunshots. The autopsy reports arrived by midday. Chief Medical Examiner Dr. Renee Goldstein delivered preliminary findings on all three decedents. Each body had been transported to the Albany County Coroner's Office the evening prior. Initial visual examination had already provided some indicators at the scene, but cause of death confirmation and ballistic trajectory analysis were necessary to determine sequence and intent. Whitney Fowler, 27, sustained a single gunshot wound to the chest, entry between the third and fourth ribs, left side downward trajectory, close-range discharge. Powder residue indicated a muzzle distance of less than 4 feet. No stippling was present on her hands or wrists, no bruising, no signs of a defensive posture. Death was nearly instantaneous due to cardiac perforation and bilateral lung collapse. Blood loss was secondary to the primary cause. Time of death estimated between 6:30 p.m. and 6:35 p.m., aligning with the 911 call. Wilson Fowler, 55, exhibited 2 gunshot wounds, both from the rear, one to the upper back, the other through the lower lumbar. Ballistic direction indicated a standing position with slight forward lean, as though walking or reaching. The bullets passed cleanly through soft tissue and bone, one lodging in the kitchen cabinetry behind where he was found. Forensics extracted that round on June 20th and sent it to Ballistics for rifling match analysis. GSR, gunshot residue, testing on Wilson returned negative. Anita Crandall, 69, was killed by a single round to the sternum, straight-on trajectory, seated. The tea mug near her hand, intact but with droplets of blood spatter on the handle, corroborated ME findings. She hadn't moved. She hadn't flinched. The round passed through her thoracic cavity, causing instantaneous cardiac arrest. Estimated time of death, concurrent with Wilson's, no more than a minute apart. The order mattered. Crime scene reconstruction software, combined with internal temperature decay and blood pooling, suggested the sequence. Anita first, Wilson second, Whitney last. That progression suggested something chilling. It wasn't a spontaneous outburst. It followed a path. On June 20th, digital analysts completed metadata synchronization between the home's smart devices and external signals. The residence, equipped with a Ring security system, had 2 registered indoor cameras, one in the kitchen, one in the living room. Both stopped recording at precisely 5:48 p.m., confirmed by internal device logs. No footage was salvaged. Upon inspection, the system had been manually disabled, not powered off, disarmed through the app. That app was linked to a single user account. Access logs confirmed the system was disarmed from inside the house using an Android device that matched the IMEI number of a phone registered to Joshua M. Fowler. The disarming occurred at 5:48 p.m., 48 minutes before the first known shot. That discovery raised a critical point in the investigation. Intent. Disabling a security system isn't spontaneous. It's preventive. Investigators also pulled door sensor logs and smart lock data. The front door opened at 6:04 p.m. and again at 6:35 p.m. The second entry aligned with responding officers' arrival. No other entries or exits occurred within that time frame. Meanwhile, forensic computer techs uncovered a cloud-based data fragment recovered from Whitney's Apple Watch, specifically her heartbeat log. According to biometric data, her resting heart rate spiked at 6:28 p.m., remained elevated for 7 minutes, then dropped to zero at 6:35 p.m. This time frame coincided with the 911 call. Investigators used this timestamp to confirm when she was likely shot. On June 21st, detectives interviewed the only person who wasn't home that night, Karen Dumont, Wilson Fowler's partner of 11 years. She had been staying with her daughter in Troy that week, recovering from minor surgery. Her insight added dimension to the family dynamic. Karen described Wilson as passive, mostly conflict avoidant, and exhausted from navigating tensions between his son and wife. She confirmed that Joshua had not worked since December 2024, relying on Wilson and Whitney for financial support. According to her, Whitney was the one trying to keep things from boiling over. When asked about Anita, Karen offered a neutral tone. She came to live with them a few years ago. I don't think she approved of anyone in that house. The lack of emotional engagement in Karen's statement was noted by detectives, but no red flags emerged. She provided full alibi verification and had no legal ties to the property. By June 22nd, all evidence pointed toward a premeditated trajectory. Not in a legal sense. Motive had not yet been established, but forensic patterns strongly implied control over the scene. Camera disarmed, weapon accessible, no signs of struggle, and timing that suggested minimal chaos. The silence between 5:48 and 6:35 p.m. became the most significant gap in the case. Assistant District Attorney Samuel Lawton noted during internal briefings, "We're not looking at a home invasion. We're not looking at reactive violence. We're looking at strategic isolation. The environment was sterilized before the act." This insight reframed the crime as something more insidious than a domestic explosion. It was a collapse, quiet, controlled, and timed. Investigators had yet to locate any suicide notes, manifestos, or explicit documentation of motive. No direct confessions had been made, no public statements. But with every device decrypted and every timestamp aligned, the timeline became harder to ignore. And it led back to one truth. Whitney had known something was coming. The system caught fragments of it, but not fast enough to stop what unfolded. On June 23, 2025, investigators returned to the Fowler residence to perform a second-pass physical evidence sweep. The focus had shifted from identifying how the crime occurred to understanding the environment it emerged from. The structure had been cleared for re-entry after initial forensic processing, but this revisit was tactical, targeting overlooked indicators, spatial patterns, object placement, item omissions. 3 officers and 1 forensic technician conducted a coordinated walkthrough of the primary rooms. The living room, where Wilson Fowler had been shot, remained undisturbed since initial processing. His recliner was angled toward the television. An open bottle of ibuprofen was on the side table. Remote in hand, power still on. Next to his chair, a torn envelope sat unbagged from the original sweep. It was a utility bill addressed to Whitney Fowler. The return address was redacted in post, but the mailing date, June 13th, confirmed that Whitney, not Wilson, had been managing household payments. This mattered because it contradicted the common assumption that Wilson was head of household. The financial responsibility, the coordination of bills, those rested on Whitney. Investigators later flagged this discrepancy during motive analysis. The kitchen offered the clearest timeline staging: 3 plates, all with reheated food, chicken breast, broccoli, rice, forks placed properly, not discarded in haste, 1 meal partly eaten, the others untouched, a wine glass shattered on the floor, collected and tested. Only Whitney's fingerprints were recovered from the stem. Near the sink, an open planner was found beneath a stack of unopened mail. Its last entry, 6:30, call Tessa, apartment. The page was dated June 18th. The family calendar, mounted on the fridge, had 3 circled dates in red: June 13th, June 18th, and June 30th. The 13th marked Witt's check-in. The 30th, highlighted but unlabeled, remained unexplained. Forensic psychologists reviewing the scene would later hypothesize this was Whitney's intended move-out date. In the hallway leading to the master bedroom, crime techs noticed something missed in the first sweep: a bedroom closet door, padlocked from the outside. The lock itself wasn't remarkable, but its presence in a domestic setting raised concern. A bolt cutter was used on scene with photographic documentation. Inside the closet, nothing of immediate evidentiary value was recovered. No weapons, no documents, but the spatial choice mattered. It implied either containment or privacy enforcement, both indicators of control within a home. Forensics logged the space for behavioral analysis. In the master bedroom, a nightstand drawer yielded a second digital device, a cracked Samsung tablet. The device had not been powered during prior forensic collection. Once charged and accessed, its contents expanded the investigative timeline. The device belonged to Whitney. It contained an old Gmail account and a draft folder with unsent emails dated as far back as February 2025. One of those drafts read, "I'm not afraid of him, I'm afraid of being stuck here." While inadmissible on its own, it reflected a psychological climate worth noting. Evidence cataloging also revealed a point that had been missed: the location of the rifle case. The AR-15 style weapon had been previously recovered near the foyer, but the gun case itself had not been seen during the first search. In this second walkthrough, it was found behind the dryer in the laundry room, partially hidden under insulation sheets. A key detail: the case lock had been broken, deliberately forced open. That supported a theory the rifle had been taken without its registered owner's consent. Ownership paperwork inside the case confirmed the firearm was purchased by Wilson Fowler in 2020 and stored under his name only. That discovery reframed assumptions about how accessible the weapon had been. If the case had been locked and forcibly opened, that meant acquisition wasn't casual. It involved choice, time, and a barrier. In the shared office room, more physical traces emerged. A whiteboard listed project deadlines with Whitney's initials next to all entries. On her desk, a printed application for transfer to Albany Medical had been completed but not submitted. The timestamp on the document footer, June 16, 2025. No applications were ever emailed. At the end of the physical review, investigators drafted an internal memo detailing the scene's behavioral signatures. While not direct evidence of a crime, these patterns shaped an interpretive framework. Isolation reinforced by space use, closet lock, weapon concealment. Ownership imbalance, Whitney's name on utilities documents. Preparations to exit, transfer paperwork, calendar dates, planner entries. Last meal shared, but not consumed by all parties. The details weren't loud, but they accumulated. And in forensic review, patterns often matter more than singular incidents. Back at headquarters, investigators started to refer to South Road not as a crime scene, but as a controlled environment. One senior detective noted in their field notes, "The house wasn't chaotic, it was held. The only thing missing was consent. There was no manifesto, no diary labeled 'Why I Did It.' But inside those walls, the evidence said enough. The absence of overt resistance, the silence of technology, the isolation of behavior. These weren't coincidences. They were systemic. Whitney Fowler wasn't just the victim of a shooting. She'd been isolated before the first round was fired. By June 24, 2025, the case file had shifted into ballistic analysis. The autopsies were complete, digital forensics were underway, and the house had yielded its patterns. Now investigators needed to confirm whether the forensic science could align each bullet with a timeline, and with intent. The AR-15 style rifle recovered at the scene was submitted to the New York State Police Forensic Investigation Center for comparative ballistics. The weapon was semi-automatic, chambered in .223 Remington, registered to Wilson Fowler. Its serial number matched the purchase paperwork found locked inside a plastic folder during the second sweep. But ownership alone wasn't the question. The real test was whether the recovered shell casings and bullets could definitively tie the weapon to each fatal shot, and whether any inconsistencies in residue or trajectory could suggest alternative scenarios. There were 4 shell casings collected at the scene. 3 were found near the entryway and adjacent hallway. 1 casing was found deeper in the kitchen, between the refrigerator and pantry. Each casing was bagged, marked, and photographed on site before being sent for rifling and ejector mark analysis. All 4 casings were fired from the recovered rifle. Striation patterns matched across every round. That ruled out the possibility of a secondary weapon. There were no other firearms on the property, no spent shells of different calibers, no physical evidence of a scuffle involving multiple shooters. Trajectory reconstruction began that same day. Using laser alignment tools and blood spatter analysis already collected, forensic specialists modeled the angle of fire in all three fatalities. Anita Crandall, seated in the dining room, had been shot from approximately 7 feet away, straight on. The round passed cleanly through her body and embedded in the drywall behind her. The chair was pushed slightly off angle, possibly from impact, but remained upright. It was likely she had no time to react. Wilson Fowler was shot from behind, according to the autopsy, but his positioning in the living room suggested movement. His body was found leaning to the right, one hand on the side of the recliner, the other stretched toward the floor. The round that killed him traveled on a descending path, indicating the shooter was standing behind and above. The second shot entered at a steeper downward angle, likely after Wilson had fallen. Both rounds exited his body and were recovered from the wood floor. Whitney was shot outside, just off the front porch. Unlike the other two, her trajectory analysis indicated movement. She had been turning, possibly walking away or sidestepping, when the bullet struck. The entry wound sat left of center, but the bullet angled downward, piercing both lungs and stopping near her spine. The scene report noted a blood pool consistent with immediate collapse. These angles mattered. They mapped proximity. They ruled out long-distance firing. All three victims had been within 10 feet of the shooter. None showed signs of resisting or attempting to subdue. There were no defensive wounds, no indications of hand-to-hand confrontation. The evidence pointed to single-direction intent. The next procedural step was gunshot residue testing. Samples were taken from all three victims at the scene. As expected, GSR tested negative for Whitney and Anita. Wilson's hands also returned negative. The only subject with confirmed residue on both hands, shirt, and forearms was the individual detained at the scene. The residue pattern was consistent with recent discharge, not secondary transfer. Chain of custody documents confirmed the rifle had been handled by only two individuals post-incident: the first responding officer who disarmed the subject and the forensic technician who bagged the weapon. There were no recorded malfunctions in the weapon, no forced ejection marks, no signs of misfire. The gun operated correctly. It had been fired deliberately. This clean profile left little room for technical ambiguity. No alternate explanations, no second shooter, no mechanical failure. The weapon's proximity to the victims, the casing dispersal, the wound patterns all pointed in one direction. The physical evidence, as sterile as it was, began to close the narrative gap left by the silence of the victims. In this case, it wasn't about who pulled the trigger. That fact had been established. What investigators were now documenting, line by line, angle by angle, was the lack of disruption. No forced escalation, no accident. Just a sequence of targeted, uninterrupted shots. For families, this is the part of a homicide case that's hardest to absorb, because it's not chaos that killed their loved ones. It was control. And in a scene where 3 lives ended in under 90 seconds, the weapon didn't lie. On June 25, 2025, the town of Grafton held a community forum inside the volunteer fire station. The space was full, folding chairs lined in uniform rows, a whiteboard dragged from a storage closet to serve as backdrop. The event wasn't publicized widely, but word of mouth had spread. 3 people had been murdered in a home less than 3 miles from Main Street. All of them locals, all of them family. The sheriff's office sent 2 representatives. A victim advocate from the district attorney's office gave a brief statement. But most people came not to listen, but to ask, how could something like this happen here when the signs had been there for years? A few residents spoke about past encounters, stray comments from Whitney, overheard yelling from the Fowler house, rumors of tension. None of it had been reported formally. One neighbor said they didn't want to get involved in someone else's home. Another admitted they assumed Whitney would eventually leave, but she hadn't, and now 3 people were dead. As the public tried to make sense of the outcome, investigators were reviewing the system that had failed to flag the escalating risk. New York's Domestic Incident Reporting Protocol requires law enforcement to file a DIR, a domestic incident report, for any complaint involving partners, regardless of arrest. 2 DIRs had been logged in relation to the Fowlers, one in 2018, one in 2021. Both were classified as verbal only, no injury. Neither triggered follow-up action. In both cases, the involved parties declined to pursue charges. Without sustained contact from the complainant, police had no basis for escalation. That's where the gap formed. Legally, nothing further was required, but procedurally, those reports could have, under updated threat assessment models, qualified the household for risk review under the county's Intimate Partner Violence Response Protocol. The protocol existed. It just wasn't applied. An internal memo from the Rensselaer County DA's office confirmed that Whitney Fowler's name never appeared on the high-risk review list. She had never filed for an order of protection. She had never reported an injury. She had never left the home. From the outside, there was no record of danger. From the inside, the pattern was there. What complicated the situation further was that the existing tools for early detection rely heavily on victim participation. Without formal complaints, the system stalls. And Whitney had done what many others do. She tried to manage it quietly. That reality prompted renewed attention on how domestic control is assessed in rural communities. Grafton, like many small towns, maintains limited access to social services. There are no full-time domestic violence specialists stationed nearby. The nearest shelter is over 20 miles away. For someone without transportation or external support, the burden to leave becomes structural, not just emotional. By the end of that week, the county announced a formal review of domestic incident triage policies, not in direct response to public pressure, but under the weight of a case that showed exactly how systemic non-action could become fatal. The review also identified another oversight. A physician at the urgent care clinic where Whitney had worked stated that 2 months prior to the murders, she'd requested time off for personal stress, citing trouble at home. No medical notes were attached. No referral was made. Her workplace, like the legal system, had absorbed the signal but failed to act. The community forum concluded quietly. No definitive statements, no promises. But a handwritten sign was taped to the wall near the exit. It read, "You don't have to wait until it's loud to believe something's wrong." On the morning of June 27, 2025, Joshua M. Fowler was arraigned in Rensselaer County Court under a standard felony protocol. He entered the courtroom in a beige correctional jumpsuit, hands cuffed, escorted by 2 deputies. There were no family members present in the gallery. No reporters allowed to film. Only a courtroom sketch artist and a single microphone near the bench. The charges read aloud were clear: 1 count of murder in the first degree, 3 counts of murder in the second degree, and 1 count of criminal possession of a weapon in the second degree. The first-degree count reflected the targeted killing of multiple victims in a single act under New York penal law, per 925-27. The weapon charge stemmed from the unauthorized use of a firearm registered under someone else's name. The defense entered a plea of not guilty on all counts. That single procedural phrase shifted the case from incident to litigation, because from that point forward, everything, every photo, every timestamp, every digital trace would have to be proven under evidentiary rules, not just investigative logic. The prosecution, led by Assistant District Attorney Samuel Lawton, filed an immediate motion to retain forensic evidence in its current chain of custody and limit defense access to materials until discovery deadlines were formalized. They also requested a court-ordered psychological evaluation, citing potential indicators of diminished capacity or planned legal manipulation. In response, the defense team, appointed by the Public Defender's Office, filed a sealed motion 2 hours later. Contents were not disclosed, but court personnel confirmed it included concerns about the defendant's mental fitness and ability to participate in proceedings. While these filings were expected, what caught attention inside the legal community was the absence of any formal confession or preliminary statement from Fowler himself. The initial detainment report described him as silent. His first police interview, according to internal memos, had been terminated early after he declined to speak and requested counsel. There was no formal statement on record. However, the prosecution had audio. On June 18th at 7:15 p.m., less than an hour after officers responded to the scene, a body cam worn by Trooper Alex Phelps captured a single comment. While seated in the rear of the cruiser, Fowler reportedly muttered, "They didn't listen. Now it's done." The phrase was faint, spoken without prompt, and logged in the chain of evidence transcript. Whether that qualified as an admissible statement would depend on pretrial motion hearings. The defense was expected to challenge its inclusion under Miranda grounds, arguing the subject had not been informed of his rights at the time of utterance. That detail, while small, reflected a larger truth. The case was procedurally tight, but not without legal exposure. No witness survived. No recording of the crime existed. Everything depended on forensic evidence and whether it could withstand cross-examination. On July 1, 2025, the court set an official discovery deadline, August 11th. The defense would have until August 25th to respond. A probable cause hearing was scheduled for mid-September. Outside court, the district attorney's office issued a brief statement. We intend to prove that this was not spontaneous. This was structured, intentional, executed in order and in silence. There was no further comment. As the legal process moved forward, pressure mounted from local advocates calling for a wider reckoning, not just for accountability in this case, but for how domestic warning signs are processed legally. A petition titled Whitney's Law began circulating online, proposing mandatory follow-up on any repeated domestic incident reports, even when victims decline prosecution. Inside the courtroom, however, policy and emotion had no place. All that mattered was what could be demonstrated: the timeline, the weapon, the surveillance data, the lack of forced entry, the GSR findings. Each piece would be tested and retested under procedural scrutiny. The story of what happened in that house was largely silent. What came next would depend on whether the evidence could speak. By late June 2025, the investigation into Whitney Fowler's murder had reached a pivotal phase. The garage on 518 4th Street, once just an ordinary outbuilding, now stood as a sealed crime scene. Inside, physical evidence, including blood spatter, fibers, and a glove bearing Joshua Fowler's prints, had been collected and cataloged. The autopsy confirmed sharp force injuries followed by asphyxiation. Whitney's estimated time of death was narrowed to between 4:00 and 5:30 a.m. on June 17th. Digital forensics filled in the gaps. Joshua's deleted searches about body decomposition and door locks, along with home Wi-Fi logs showing his phone active after Whitney's final signal, helped establish a timeline. He refused to cooperate with investigators. His legal team remained silent, relying on procedural defenses. The prosecution prepared its case with circumstantial but compelling evidence. Meanwhile, Whitney's family and community honored her at a memorial in Troy. Her absence raised difficult questions about missed warnings, systemic failures, and how violence can thrive behind closed doors. A bill inspired by her case, the Whitney Signal, gained traction in the city council, aiming to improve response to non-criminal domestic disturbance patterns. It was a small sign of change, born from tragedy. As of June 30th, 2025, Joshua Fowler remains jailed without bond, pending trial. No confession has been made. No one has returned to the house. A sign now hangs quietly outside the fence. She asked for help. No one came. Sometimes the warning signs aren't loud. They don't always come with bruises or police reports. Sometimes it's isolation, control, fear behind a closed door. If there's one thing I've learned from Whitney's story, it's this: silence can be fatal. And if you sense something is wrong, speak, ask, act. Don't wait until it's too late. What would you have done differently? Have you ever seen someone you care about drift into silence? Let's talk about it in the comments. If this story touched something in you, or even just made you think, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. Or if it didn't connect with you, I'd still like to hear why. Every perspective helps us grow. And if you want to be here for the next story that needs to be told, subscribe to the channel. Your voice matters.